Are you being fair to Kahneman when he sort of makes a seemingly off-the-cuff comment at the end of his book, suggesting an intervention or how we can get better? Or are you frustrated that the man that, while he was espousing not using intuitions, was using his intuition to tell you not to use your intuitions?
I sure like the latter explanation. Maybe you can accuse me of being unfair to Kahneman, but it does seem a little strange to me that you have an entire 40-year research career devoted towards uncovering heuristics and biases, and maybe I'm wrong, but I've never seen any studies they conducted to say, well, is there anything we can do to improve the situation? The paper that I sent to you, Matt, basically says, if he can make the heuristics and biases go away very simply, then there's nothing for him to talk about anymore. And it wasn't an off-the-cuff comment. It was in print on the second to last page of a book. So that's pretty close to a conclusion. Now, undoubtedly, I'm frankly reacting more to the way Kahneman has been translated into the diagnostic errors world, where it has become the mantra of anybody associated with worrying about how diagnostic errors arise. And it's become polarized and radicalized and everything else, so that everybody's now taught that if only we make cognitive biases go away, then the world will be a better place and presumably people will live forever. Well, that's not just, I think, wrong-headed, it's also dangerous because it involves switching a whole bunch of resources to an area where our best guess is that it isn't going to make any difference, but it is going to chew up an awful lot of time for students and teachers. So I think that at least having a counterpoint to examine isn't such a bad thing.
Hi there, just a general question about individual differences. So a lot of the graphs showed mean performance, and I'm wondering if certain students benefit more from retrieval practice, whether it's targeting high GPA students or low GPA students, whether any of you could speak to that.
I can speak a little bit to that. With all of our classroom studies, we have looked and always included students who qualify for special education services as well as gifted students. And in our publications, you'll see that we report in the results section sort of a clean data set, but then we always report the full data set with special ed and gifted and so on. Gifted is tough just because students are already at ceiling. You have a traditional ceiling problem. If students are already doing so well, you kind of can't get them to do any better. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have shown, we haven't published it, but we do have data to support that testing effects help the special education students. It's not as well controlled as we would like, so it may be more anecdotal, just because the special education students get a lot of actually extra retrieval practice than even our sort of normal students. And in a college setting, we've done research, and there have been a handful of studies, but we've done research to look at retrieval practice with low and high working memory span students, and we see a bigger benefit for the retrieval practice, so a bigger difference between quizzed and non-quizzed performance for low working memory spans who benefit more than high working memory spans.
And actually, to add a little bit more to that, not about necessarily individual differences as ability levels, but one thing why we think basically using test retrieval practice until you get it right is so useful for any student is that it conforms to the level of knowledge a student brings. So if you bring a little bit less knowledge to the table, well, you'll just have to use a little bit more time so you get it right, but you'll still get the benefit. So it's a relatively general technique that doesn't matter really well where you start off with your knowledge base or ability. If you keep using it, you'll eventually get the information correct, you'll recall it correctly, and then you'll get the benefits. So it's kind of like a very, very good strategy regardless of your ability level.
One other thing I think to add is, you do benefit more from succeeding at the retrieval practice than failing. On the other hand, the failures will potentiate subsequent study. So that again would interact with the level of knowledge. You might want to tune it, the materials to different, so that there's a high success rate, but it is somewhat sort of self-correcting, which is kind of what John's referring to, that there's both benefits. And so it's really very general. And, you know, often there is a tendency for people to want to think of individual differences at some whole other level than this panel would think about them. That is, people differ, but not in the fundamental architecture. I mean, it's sort of like, I remember once testifying in a court case where they were trying to tell me that some witness had a totally different brain than everybody else. That, you know, said it's like everybody in a room, if we analyze their heart function, they'd have different sizes of cavities and beats and this and that, but the architecture is the same. And I think that's true of learning, that there are these fundamental principles. It isn't like there's a set of people walking out there that profit from massing on the long term rather than spacing, but a lot of people want to believe that.
Thanks for all the talks. I just had sort of a practical question, since I'm a practical anatomist after all. One of the things that we started with our group was that we started to test them every couple of weeks, because of all the theory, you know, we go to the meetings as well. And so we test them, and when we asked them at the end of this is 600 or so students, and everyone, when we asked them, they say, well, yes, does it keep you on task? Oh, fantastic, kept us on task. Did we learn more? Absolutely. That was really helpful. Did you think you maybe scored better in exams? Well, possibly we may have. And when did you like it, and would you like to keep doing it? Absolutely not. They absolutely freaking hate it. Which actually brought me to the whole concept of something that we call appreciate. They both like it and hate it at the same time. And I think the conclusion that I've come to, which I hope you will disabuse me of, is that in fact what you're doing does not in fact reflect the zero-sum game that the students have in terms of time. If we had showed them the earlier slide where they showed that when they prepared and they knew it a minute later or a day later, when they sort of all jammed all the material in quickly at the last moment, that's in fact the strategy. They would not looked at any more of your slides. It was fantastic. They've now confirmed that if I study really hard the day before, I'll pretty much maximize my mark and minimize the amount of time I put in. And unlike 8-year-olds, they don't, that's what they will do. and so I guess what I'm getting at is I'd like you to comment, I guess, really on how you bring that into the kind of the real world. Students are smarter than that. Really, anyone.
I could give one comment. It's in just talking with individual students over the years about things like desirable difficulties and so on. I have said things like, after all these years of research and so on, I don't really feel like I can tell you how to make your learning easier or effortless. I can tell you how to make it efficient, and I can tell you another benefit is you can spend less time. So sitting there in the library reading something again with your eyes doing reading behavior, but your mind on what you're going to do that evening and so on, rereading, those things pay off so little, but they're taking time. And I mean, this is sort of anecdotal, so it's worth about that much, but a lot of these students pick up and they would come back repeatedly in the class saying what they're doing and so on. And one student simply took the generation effect very seriously and started doing it at all levels that you could think of to practice generating, at every kind of generation, from diagrams to whatever. And again, this is so, I don't know how much to make of this, but not only did they go up a full grade point average the rest of their career, but the time on task was reduced quite a bit. So, I mean, we haven't stressed that, and I'm searching to think whether I can think of a published report, but some of these very effective techniques do reduce time on task. We're sometimes guilty, sometimes out of necessity, but whatever, of comparing something where there's more time on task to less. And that's why Pooja had to run her experiments both ways, controlling for that. But I think there's time savings if students could be convinced of it.
But you're just saying that when they're more engaged, they do better. I mean, that's what it sounds like at any rate. When you're more engaged and you do more ways of looking at the same thing, and you make a more active
The word engaged
effort.
is a little funny because you might think things they prefer to do would be things they would consider being engaged in, and they make wrong choices.
Is because, one way it saves students time taking retrieval practice, taking quizzes and so forth, is it quickly identifies to them what they do and do not know, much more accurately than when they just look at the textbook, go over the keynotes they're supposed to learn, they're looking at them, and they're fooled into thinking, oh, I know that, I know that, I know that, I know that. But if they have to answer a question about it, they find out, oh, I guess I know the first two, but I don't know the third and fourth. So a test makes them use the study time they do have, and I agree with you, that's limited, but it allows them to use it more efficiently and effectively.
Hello, I'm Raina. I'm from the Department of Psychology. I've been hearing a lot of you talk about studying methods, specifically about one topic or discipline at a time. And if you think about what an average student goes through, at least in our education system at the moment, you're learning upwards of 3 to 5 to 6 subjects at a time. I brought this up a little to John last night, and I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit how you think your research might generalize to a situation where students are learning more than one topic, and particularly, should we continue to have classes the way we do in a blocked format, where you're learning one course in a blocked format at a time, or should we try to integrate all of our subjects together, interweaving them and diverting from the way we've been doing things for a while?
At least as far as your first question about, students have major challenge with respect to juggling lots of different content areas, and we all understand that as teachers, and we try to be sensitive to that. And one thing they need to do a lot more of is just pre-planning, so organizing the study time so they know when they're going to study one topic versus another. The good news is, at least there's preliminary evidence suggesting that some of these strategies, and retrieval practice in particular, can help you sidestep some of the problems from studying multiple different contents, because retrieval practice itself appears to basically slow down or decrease interference between learning different content. So just using these kinds of strategies could actually help students keep the different content straight, per se. And one thing that all of our research has been about, I guess this gets a little bit to the first question, the last question as well, is we're not only interested in what works well, we want to know what works well efficiently. Because we could probably develop a lot of strategies that are going to work really, really great if students have unlimited time and will take, basically devote all of their time to studying. And I know all of the students here probably do that, but in fact, if you want some life outside of school, you need efficient study strategies. And I think a lot of the ones we're discussing today, even though students may not love them or may appreciate them, in fact, they tend to be a lot more efficient than and effective than some of the strategies they do use in a pinch. And sure, maybe you'll be able to squeak by on a test if you cram the night before. Well, for those of you who are teachers in here, don't let them get away with that. Give them cumulative exams where, yeah, you might be able to squeak by, but really the students would be, quite frankly, punishing themselves by only cramming. So there's things we can do as teachers to set up our classes to help students out. I know what you're all thinking, of course, my student evaluations will go down if I'm a teacher. Well, maybe you start doing some of these things after you get tenure, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't change in those ways. I think they've got to happen.
I mean, with respect to the kind of interleaving students get just by having multiple courses and schedules. There's a whole set of issues about if interleaving's showing benefits in the kind of situations we've seen it with motor skills and concept learning and so on. How far can you push it? What can really be interleaved? So I gave a talk once at St. Olaf College where I met with biology teachers afterwards, and they said, you know, we think students should have the invertebrate course before they get the vertebrate course. Are you telling us we could do one big course and interleave those? It's a really interesting research question. You wouldn't want to do it sort of arbitrarily, but I could imagine that if that went back and forth in some kind of sequence, you'd develop a richer, more elaborated representation of those worlds. But we're doing things in our laboratory and I think elsewhere. What's the limits on interleaving, and just how much can you push it?
Integrated curriculum have been very popular and around medical schools for literally 60 years, dating back to the organ system approach of Case Western Reserve in the 50s, where you have 4 weeks to learn hearts and then another 4 weeks to learn lungs and another 4 weeks to learn kidneys, and off you go. And it probably was epitomized by our first curriculum here, which we essentially threw out about 10 years ago. Because I think an integrated curriculum has a couple of real dangers which fall directly out of the underlying psychology. The first is that, in fact, I'm not at all concerned about the student confusing what they learned in their differential equation course with what they learned in their art history course. And it's a well-known psychological phenomenon that interference amounts things that are conceptually overlapping. If they don't overlap conceptually, they don't interfere. The second is the properties of long-term memory. And in one of my talks, I have a quote from, I think, a guy named Bjork about human associative memory and how human learning as opposed to computer learning amounts to integrating new knowledge with what you already know. And as we started to do the last curriculum reform, we realized that, in fact, much of what integrated curriculum do messes all that up, because what you've got is 5 different disciplines with 5 different kinds of values and epistemologies all impacting on the same patient who's got chest pain. And it's a real recipe for ensuring that, in fact, you don't get that kind of relearning and growth of learning by integrating with what you already know. There's just too many disciplines all interfering and happening all at once. So I certainly don't view any kind of integration as a panacea. I would take it as an empiricist and be very, very careful about how I proceed.
Hi, this is not my field. I'm from neuroscience, so education is far afield. But just a couple of questions about the study versus study and test paradigms. That shows a scholastic improvement, which is important to kids to do better on the follow-up quizzes or tests, which gives them confidence maybe. But if you put them in a real-world situation or you give them a novel problem, can they incorporate that knowledge better if they've been tested on it in a classroom than people have just studied alone? I mean, is there a real-world improvement outside of the classroom, which would be important, I think, for the ultimate goal of education?
Yes. I didn't talk about the studies, but we have a number of studies over the 8 years where students studied and tested some basic tenet of why this particular czar was involved in Russia during the Russian Revolution. And then a month later, we asked them a novel scenario of how that same czar would deal with welfare programs in the United States today. Completely novel. They learned about the czar in the Russian Revolution. That's what they were tested on. The final exam is a completely novel question. And yes, what they were quizzed on, they're then better able to accurately perform on the novel question than just students who restudied.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Hi, I'm an undergrad psychology student here at Mac. There's a question yesterday about technological kind of context in the classroom. I'm wondering whether or not you think students are becoming habitualized to overstimulation, and whether or not that overstimulation is becoming detrimental in the long run, and how we should kind of combat that with the learning styles that we've been talking about here.
Well, I think there's certainly the divided attention and so on. And I mean, in technology, we have a colleague at UCLA, Danny Oppenheimer, has done a line of research where people take notes in handwriting or they take notes on their computer. and they take lots more notes on they're able to get a lot more down on their computer, and then they score less well on the criterion tests. So and then I forget where it was done. There was a nice study where they had a camera angle that let people see who was playing Tetris or whatever as the current thing they would play instead of listening to a lecture. And it not only impaired them, it impaired people behind them that could see their screen. So, that's a sort of stressor that has multiple effects. We talked about simulators some, and some of the high-tech things doesn't get hands-on in some ways that are very important. So one comparison using a sophisticated GIS technology on the computer having to achieve graphical stuff was compared with one where there were globes and people were using plaster of Paris and colors and stuff to handle the globe and shift it around and make things on it, and that was quite a bit better. So I don't know, it's some balance back and forth between these good things technology bring to us and then not letting them have the negative effects.
Bruce Wayman, Bruce, you were up here a couple of minutes ago. He and I did a recent study where we were teaching anatomy learning, and there were 3 groups. One group that learned just off the front and back views of the pelvis, 2 or 4 photographs. A second group which had a state-of-the-art virtual reality simulator where they could walk in and out and around and about the pelvis, and a third which had a simple plastic model. We tested them on a real pelvis, a cadaver pelvis. Virtual reality showed no advantage at all over simply front and back photographs. That's one of about 5 studies now showing exactly that. And the plastic pelvis had a clear advantage over both.
The thing to keep in mind too, any technology is adopted because it has some positives, but also any technology has negatives. Any invention you can name, it will have positives and negatives. And I think we're still right now in education and other places really need to figure out exactly what positives and negatives there are for these new technologies so that we basically can steer students in the right direction. And I don't think we know right now to the degree that some of these technologies that I see adopted, like to help young students learn mathematics. I've not done experiments with these technologies, but they seem to be a lot more glitz, technology for technology's sake, and distracting than they are really focusing the students on learning the core content. And I think we just need to do really systematic investigations to really understand the degree to which this is just overstimulation and stimulation for its own sake are really going to lead to positive outcome. And I think the word's out. I think often we are just using technology for technology's sake, and it's probably not really benefiting students to a great deal.
And can I just say one thing? I was just going to say also that I think that we should look to the literature on animations, because that's a technology that's been around a little bit longer, but they've really, I think, done a good job. Barbara Tversky has a great paper on this, looking at, when animations help learners versus when they would lead them astray based on kind of the principles. And so I think what we need to do is follow that kind of model with newer technologies.
Pooja, I realize that from the great state of Illinois, you have to reference Lincoln and the penny, but next time realize in Canada we don't actually have a penny anymore. Okay. But yay for Illinois and Lincoln. Okay. Quick question is, and the other comment is about the point about waiting for a while to give feedback. Thank you. Boy, that's going to rationalize so when the students say, I didn't get it back for 10 days, I can say, actually, I'm quoting this woman who said we should wait a little while. And then the final it's a big question. Dan, you really got me riled up a little bit as a humanist, which I think was part of what you were trying to do. And I just wanted to say that I think that what you seem to be saying was there was no role for any kind of case study. I mean, we talk about research design, experimental, cross-sectional, longitudinal, and case study. I found in our work around communication and research that actually going out into the field and talking to people, more than autoethnography, ethnography is a way to see how the concepts are being seen by people in the field and allowing for new experimentation. Would you accept that might play a role?
Yeah, I think in my attempts to be humorous, I probably gave the impression that I thought that the only research method worthwhile was experiments. And I don't mean that at all. I've done observations, I've done qualitative research myself. What I find annoying is when we take observational evidence and try to draw causality type conclusions from that. And that's all I meant.
Okay, last question. Marcus.
Okay. All right, closing this entire session. Okay, no pressure. Dan Robinson, I think you really elegantly illustrated the sort of divide between sort of two subgenres of psychology, who really should have a lot of sort of interplay, like we should be sharing knowledge. And given that we are already so close, one of the discussions we've had at this university is who are the people you think that should be stepping forward and making sure that these fields become integrated, like that the real knowledge that we are generating in cognitive psychology is being shared with not just other researchers but teachers. Like who does that work in a perfect world if you made the university?
Well, I mentioned the cognitive psych folks, among which many are here. I mentioned the cognitive load theory folks. There's people like Rich Mayer, Joel Levin. There's people in special education, like Steve Graham, Sharon Vaughn, that are good folks in that area. But what you guys are doing here, what Joe and Dave are doing, trying to do a symposium on cognition, learning, and education, and inviting psych folks, I think these efforts bring people together. Jeff and I joke about, we're kind of the oddballs here, so to speak, but this is really great from my perspective to be able to be a part of this. And I think if we do more of these things, will help us all get together, so to speak. Thanks.
That's a good place to finish.
Okay, so I have the honor of, closing the symposium. Before I thank all the speakers, there are a number of people that really made this possible in terms of financial support. So the Office of the President and the Office of the Provost, they've been very supportive. I saw Patrick Dean here last night and during John's talk, scribbling down numerous notes, clearly engaged in thinking about how science can help the institution do better education. Arshad, who is here this morning from the McMaster Institute for Innovation and Excellence in Teaching and Learning, has contributed to the symposium and is going to be an active participant in that grant process that I spoke about. The VP Research has contributed, the Alumni Association, the Dean of Science, and the Department of Psychology, Neuroscience, and Behavior. So I think there's broad interest in this topic of what can science tell us about education. And I think if I were to sum up sort of everything that I learned in the last day and a half, you could talk about desirable difficulty and spacing and successive relearning, and the testing effect and the role of feedback and the relation between speed and accuracy. Those are all specific things. But the thing that I was struck most by was the disconnect between people's beliefs in what leads to better teaching and learning and what actually leads to better learning. And I think students, educators, policymakers need to think about that when they're making decisions. I have a couple other thank yous. So the entire project would not have been possible without Michelle Cadieux and Irina Gillick in the back there. If you ever organize a symposium, find them. We need to thank for the AV and technical support, Greg here on the camera, and Tony taking pictures, and Chris McAllister and the AV tech guys for making sure that you can all hear us and see us. All these presentations will be uploaded to the website, so you can go back and review them and think about them and pass them on to your friends and colleagues. Additionally, on the website, at the end of this month, there will be a call for proposals, specifically for research geared into the live lab. So we've gotten money from the Institute for Teaching and Learning and from the VP Research, and we're going to try and bootstrap or kickstart some research programs that can really look at what we can do in the live lab to help us understand education. So after this, as soon as we're done, there are a number of people that are coming to a working lunch. You know who you are if you're invited. If you're coming to the working lunch, just stay here. For everybody else, there's a table reserved over at the Phoenix with some appetizers.
and there's going to be somebody that's going to walk you over there, and if you can just meet right outside these doors, they will take you over to the Phoenix. At 2:30, for all the people that are over at the Phoenix, at 2:30, there will be another tour of the live lab. So go over to the psych lobby. At 2:30, they'll take you upstairs, and you'll get a tour and see what is so exciting about the live lab. Right, and those people who are going to psychonomics on the bus leaves at 4 sharp, and it's just behind this building. Okay, so you know who you are. You have to come and get your luggage and then get to the bus. Right? Michelle, am I forgetting anything? Bring $20. Right, $20 for the bus, which is a deal because it drops you right at the hotel. Irina, am I forgetting anything? Okay, then I would like to, for the last time, thank all the speakers and everybody for coming.